Okay, and we're live.
Bet.
Wait a little bit. Let me use my phone. Mm-hmm. Okay. Tagged everybody on Discord. Okay. Okay, I think that's all I'm gonna do now for promotion. Okay. Gonna start? Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Danilo Evangelista. It is hurricane season 2024. Welcome. It is now June 1st. Finally, the long awaited hurricane season has begun. Um, we are now at day one and we have 182 days to go. Um, and I guess within those next 182 days, we'll find out just what actually happens this hurricane season. But well, and I guess we'll find out whether or not this season really is going to be as active as everybody is saying. And tonight, I guess we'll kind of go over just how active it could get, as at least as in depth as I could possibly go. Um, and I hope you enjoy it. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoy it. Share also the stream with others. We're gonna go on for about an hour or so, and I have my friend Danny Alvarez here. Hello, Danny.
Yeah, how you doing, Danilo? Happy hurricane season. Y'all might know me as well, Hub TV on YouTube. But yeah, I'm happy to be here tonight.
Yeah, and we're happy at least somebody was able to show up tonight, and thanks to Danny for showing up. We're gonna guess over the next hour celebrate the start of hurricane season. There's really not much going on though. I mean, any thoughts that you have about this season? At least anything that you have to say just to start off?
Honestly, believe that the most quiet we're gonna get in the Atlantic this year is probably these first 2 weeks. Honestly, after these first 2 weeks, it's gonna really start picking up for real. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's actually quite different because for first off, starting on June 1st this year is one of the first years that we started off on June 1st with a blank tropical weather bulletin on the NHC. We literally have nothing going on right now, no activities expected during the next 7 days in the Atlantic and in the Eastern Pacific. Me and Danny were actually talking about this. This area of interest doesn't look like it's going to form, but we were also talking about that after this, even in the Eastern Pacific, it looks quiet as well. Really nothing at all to really speak of in either basin.
Surprising, surprising for sure. Since I've been tracking full time since 18, and I feel like this is the first time that we're like in June 1st, and we're at this day, right? And there's like nothing small, is at least consistent with what we think could be a real signal or not. There hasn't been that at all yet. I
Hmm.
mean, I'm pretty sure it will change, right? But like, it is different. It is different for sure. You know.
Yeah, I've been tracking consistently since 2020, and I was there. I was there since the beginning with Danny too, and we were tracking in 2020 where this time in 2020 we had a storm like Cristobal already happening, right, in the Gulf,
Yeah.
and we were already on our C name storm. And this year we have yet to even see our first A name storm as well. It's literally the first, quite literally, not even gotten a single storm yet. No preseason storms. Even last year had a preseason system, although it was unnamed. But even on this day last year, we had Arlene, which was beginning to form in the Gulf, even though it was like a very short-lived, weak sort of storm. And if we take a look at the satellite image of the Atlantic, kind of just paints the picture. There's really not much to really speak of at all in terms of activity. You can see there's a lot of strong upper level westerly winds, lots of dry air across the basin too. It's really not yet in that favorable sort of atmospheric environment for activity just yet. There are some tropical waves though. There's a tropical wave in the Caribbean. There's also some in the MDR. I actually have the analysis map from the NHC about the tropical waves, and you can see there are actually several being analyzed right now. One in the Caribbean, one about to approach the islands, and then there's also one in the central MDR. And guess yet to see another wave move off of Africa yet. But I also find it interesting as well how these waves that you see here are literally the first four waves that have come off Africa so far this year. We've actually got a pretty late start when it comes to waves this year.
Unusual. Like I've never seen this like in like my tracking career. Like the first.
You cut out, Danny. We well, you cut out a little bit if you were speaking. Hold on, let me just make sure everything is all right. You still there, Danny? Sometimes the
Yeah, can
internet.
you hear me?
Oh yeah, now I can hear you. The internet got a little weird. We have some people in the chat actually. Dawson Dufour from Louisiana. Hello and good evening. Thanks for joining us. And also I see Brandon Dunn as well in the chat. Models showing favorable window for the second half of the month as expected. Yes, we're actually going to talk about that, and I actually should bring up the European chart. See, there's so many charts I should have brought up that I didn't, that I wasn't able to. Um, but yeah, so activity is not expected now, but activity could actually occur within the next few weeks in June. But again, as Danny said, it'll probably be that these first few weeks will be not really, these first two or so weeks will be not all that active in terms of activity.
And yeah, in the Caribbean or yeah,
Your Danny, your audio is it's very spotty.
for
Yeah, it's very spotty. I don't know, it's probably the internet connection or something.
can you hear me better?
Um, yeah, now I can actually.
Oh yeah, I was saying that like once you get that favorability pattern, like the middle part of June, you probably have to start watching the places like the Western Gulf and the Bay of Campeche, maybe the Caribbean, because that might be like the first areas that might truly be favorable for development.
Um, yeah. Uh, Brandon Dunn, it's Danny Alvarez, Weather Hub TV. He's wondering if you're Danny Morris. Uh, but yeah, as Danny was saying, it looks like things will be more favorable I guess around the Caribbean and Gulf, which is really where we kind of watched in the early season anyways when it comes to development. Actually, I should have brought this up. Climatology uh in the Atlantic generally. Let's actually look at June as a whole. Let me find June. Climatology in the Atlantic overall in June tends to be uh, more favored towards the Caribbean and really the Gulf, anyways. Activity we really expect mostly towards the Western Caribbean and Gulf is when we really see most storms form. In the case of last year, again, we saw Arlene in the Gulf, and then I think we saw as well in 2020, we talked about Cristobal. And then even in 2021, there was a storm, Claudette, I think. Is that right, Claudette?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so yeah, June definitely, especially I guess in these more active hurricane seasons, there tends to be more activity that occurs um in June, and we tend to see stuff that happens in the Gulf as well. Um, so I guess besides June, what else do you think it looks like we could see? Because there's June, we have mid June, and then the ensembles actually seem to go out to early July. Actually here the EPS sort of thing goes out to early July, and even from mid to late June all the way into early July as well. Maybe things look a little favorable too.
I'll watch the MDR in the later part of June. I think that area seems to get like, especially in the ensembles camp and like those longer range models, they seem to show a lot of ensembles developing stuff in the MDR. And like typically, like if we do get development in June, it's around that time of June. So we may have to start watching. Besides the Caribbean and the Western Caribbean and Gulf, that might be the other area to watch.
Yeah. Also, yeah, so similar to last year, because we had activity in the MDR in June last year, and because of how warm it was, and looks like it's going to be as warm. It's as warm, if not even warmer, potentially this year.
Right.
And actually, I have the sea surface temperature anomaly map by the NOAA Coral Reef Watch. You could see just basically at record warmth right now in the MDR, and we've been like this since the start of the year, and even from last year when we were at this time of the year, really warm. Once again, record warm, and I'll actually search it up here just to bring the comparison to last year. Let's bring it to the Western Hemisphere just to see how he looked like this time of year last year on June. And actually, we were warmer. Let me bring this to compare to how it looks like. So this is this year on May 31st, but you get the general idea. It's only one day of a difference. Um, and then compared to this time last year, basically on the start of hurricane season, much warmer this year than we were last year, even in the MDR and in the general Atlantic as a whole. It's just so much warmer right now, and we have a lot. Well, one of the biggest difference between last year and this year is one, we not only is the MDR warmer, but we also have an incoming La Nina, was opposed to last year we had an El Nino, and that's really going to make things all that much more interesting, right?
Right, right. With a La Nina coming in, it would definitely mean like more favorability, especially towards the Caribbean. Because last year we had like a favorable MDR, but like the El Nino kind of shut down the Caribbean from being active that year for sure. Unlike this year, where La Nina enhances the Caribbean activity happening.
Yeah. Ice Cube from Georgia, Carrollton, Georgia. Hello and welcome. Uh, yeah, so last year, and I even think for the early season too, because last year, the MDR was active in June, but then we kind of shut off in July. Um, And oh, Brandon Dunn also commented. Danny Morris too also states that there could be a at the end of June there could be something to watch in the MDR. I'm definitely inclined to agree, given just how warm sea surface temperatures are in the MDR in general. So it's all possible. And also, I think it's really interesting too how cold the Pacific is, not just in terms of La Nina, but in the PDO too. And I actually found this really interesting just to kind of zoom out and show the entire globe. You could really see just this, and this is something that's really interesting because this goes hand in hand with La Nina, this really cold ring. It's kind of like how we view the AMO in the Atlantic, but in the Pacific it's the PDO. And notice how cold this ring is all the way from the Alaska, Siberian sort of area, all the way down to the west coast of the United States, and then into kind of bleeding into the deep tropical Eastern Pacific, although that area is actually really warm right now just off the coast of Mexico. But in general, this means a negative PDO, which the climate models, especially noted by the CANCIPs in June, actually thinks will persist and maybe strengthen as the season goes on. But it's especially characterized. Just look at how warm the subtropical Pacific is, and this is just a classic sort of look for a La Nina this year, which is what which is what the climate models have been indicating since the start of the year, and this is why everybody's so confident as well on this season being really active.
Right.
Um, yeah, and actually, let's take a look at the climate models now. Um, Let me see. Let's see the CANCIPs, and I'll show you here. This is where it is. The CANCIPs. You can see they actually show the signature for the PDO, and then just go out into time. CANCIPs are really aggressive on the La Nina coming on, as all the models are, but really notice especially how this cold ring in the Pacific remains. And then I found this really interesting, the difference between last month and this month, how much the CANCIPs actually uptrended in terms of warmth in the Atlantic. I'll actually show September. This is September for June, and compared to this time last month on the run, notice just how warm it is in comparison. Very interesting. So, somebody asked about the Bermuda High. Um, is the Bermuda High strong right now? Not really, because we're about to get a negative NAO, or we're getting a negative NAO right now in the Atlantic. And this is actually going to help, at least over the next week or so, reduce the trades in the Atlantic. And we could actually get very sizable warming. And you can actually see, I'll show you the 500 millibar for its height map. Very strong high over Greenland, a bunch of these troughs in the subtropical Atlantic. This is really going to help reduce the zonal winds, the strong easterly zonal winds over the MDR. And this map that you see of all these bloody oranges and reds is going to get stronger, and we're probably going to break even more records when it comes to sea surface temperature anomalies probably over the next several weeks. And it's not good, especially given that we're in hurricane season now. Today's June 1st,
Right.
and we're going to be talking about probably warmer sea surface temperature anomalies. Although I will say that sea surface temperature anomalies have really wavered a lot. Every 2 weeks, they seem to kind of go up a little bit, then go down a little bit, then go back up. And I guess we're probably on an uptrend right now, and we'll probably see, just from this uptrend alone, from what I'm guessing, probably more records broken in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies. And I'll show you why this is really significant. Look at all this. These oranges represent westerly zonal winds, and this is all being induced by these troughs that I just showed you in the subtropical Atlantic. So this is going to make the MDR skyrocket in terms of warmth, and we'll probably see an even warmer main development region than we see right now. And I guess that goes hand in hand with, the CANSIPs uptrending in June in sea surface temperature anomalies. Just makes sense
Right,
to
right.
me. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that I feel like with the canceps going up with the anomalies and the temperatures and the sea surface temperatures, I feel like it's what's causing like the map overall with the precipitation to be even stronger. You know, it's like you could tell that with the warmer SSTs, it might be enhancing even more instability to the atmosphere and maybe allowing even more systems to form with that.
Right. Yeah. Um, and that's also part of the reason why there's been so many aggressive forecasts this season. And if you're not aware, I'll just make you aware of all the forecasts we've gotten this year. The most recent with being TSR, and we actually talked about this several days ago when it was released. TSR came out, 24 named storms. And to me, and I've talked about this with Danny, but um, it's really astonishing just how just the general consensus of everybody, quite literally everybody, agreeing around the same general range of 20 plus, early lower to mid 20s in named storm count this year, and there's been very little variation from that.
Right.
There's been very little variation. Tornado clips, I would agree. He says that it looks more favorable than 2020. And you know what? Actually, let me bring up 2020 just to show you, because 2020, sea surface temperature wise, nothing compares to this year, but 2020 especially doesn't compare to this year. Just look at this is obviously May 31st of 2024. Look at how warm the MDR is, but then just look at how it looked like on June 1st of 2020. We do not we do not compare at all. And, not saying we're going to get 30 name storms. In fact, I think that chance is probably much lower given that we don't have a May storm. And I'm pretty sure Danny agrees. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Maelstrom is a huge factor if we're gonna get like that high of a storm count. Like you definitely need like a preseason storm or two for that.
hmm I mean, can't rule out the fact of December activity, I would say to that, but December activity is kind of like a really rare thing. And I've seen some people maybe say that, this season could potentially produce some December activity. And, it's possible if things fall into the right place that we get extra activity in December, which adds on to name storms even more. Uh, but we'll see. But either way, I think it's solid that maybe what the forecasts are saying. Maybe we could get solidly over 20, and I definitely think that with my predictions. But I'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, just comparing to 2020, it's just astonishing just how much we've really, you know, we really don't compare at all. Not even 2020 compares to where we are this year. We're really in a league of our own, basically.
It's wild. It's wild.
Yeah. I guess we could take a look at the models over the next several weeks. Why not? you know, let's just see what's going on because it's really not. It's really not too much happening though. Let's see. GFS. Like I gotta go to the regular GFS. That's the zonal winds up to the next uh 2 weeks. Looks like once again another week or so, another 2 weeks of um warming, and then we'll probably see it abate for a little bit, and then probably I could imagine in later June we'll probably see warming once again increase. Um and we'll probably see. I don't know. Either way, when it comes to sea surface temperature anomalies, I think this is baked in. Everything we see right now, now that we're at June 1st, we arrived at the hurricane season. I feel like everything we have now is probably just baked in. And unless this turns into miraculously, the sea surface temperature pattern turns into some sort of 2013, which there's absolutely no signs of. That's probably only like a miraculous thing that could happen in July, maybe. There's really not much stopping the season.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part for like people who live in land is that there is not much that there when it comes to that. There's not much things that maybe could stop the season from being as active as it most possibly could be.
Hmm.
For sure.
And here's the GFS out to the next week. Nothing much happening. They show a little bit of things spinning up in the Eastern Pacific. Again, going back to the idea thing that in general, rising motion in the Western Hemisphere. And we talked about this in the video from earlier that I put out today. Um, just the atmosphere in general in the Western Hemisphere as we head on into June will continue to become more favorable. And we'll probably get stuff to develop in the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic. And I guess the GFS is showing that a little bit as we head into around June 7th, June 8th. It's very small, though, not anything too significant. Let me actually zoom in on it. There we go, the Eastern Pacific. There's a little bit of something that tries to spin up there. Let's see what the Euro shows. European is not really on board with it too much. Um, yeah. I don't know, Danny. What do you think?
For the next 10 or so days, we probably, if anything, probably maybe there is a slim chance in the East Pack around the 8th or 9th of June. I've seen some signal from some models of maybe a development happening there, but besides that, I don't really see much happening in the next couple of days. There was another area that was in the East Pack that was in AOY a couple of days ago, but that didn't materialize into anything. So yeah, I think that one from the 8th or 9th that the GFS is showing have been hinting at, and I think some other models have been, if I'm not mistaken. But I think about the only signal, at least for the next 10 days, in either the East Pack or the Atlantic.
Yeah, yeah. Doesn't really look like there's much of anything going on. So, I guess with that, you want to actually though, before I get into anything else, let's talk about the GEFS long range because I like to look at this from time to time. Um, the long range kind of how it looks like um, once we get past 384 hours, kind of as a weekly thing to see how it looks like, past early to mid June. Let me see. Here we go. Um, and yeah, looks like after we get towards mid June, I'll go back to this. Rising motion enters the general Western Hemisphere um, around mid June, and we kind of stay over the Atlantic and Africa all the way through early July, and I guess the GEFS kind of reflects that. Notice how much precipitation we begin to get in the Atlantic, and this kind of starts reflecting a little bit if this long range GEFS that kind of goes out to early July. I know it's a little bit unreliable to use, but it's not bad to look at when you're trying to pinpoint, super long range signals, kind of like the CFS weekly. And let's actually bring that up too. Yeah, it kind of remains. I guess you could kind of notice that maybe we might see activity from mid June onward begin to pick up. Wouldn't shock me in the very least. So maybe we might be not too active over the next week or so as we head into June, which is actually quite different because when was the last time? When was the last time that we actually started in mid June or later? Was it 2014? Or
Yeah, 2014 was the last time that the Atlantic started like later than the June 10th, right? I'm pretty sure it's been definitely a while, and 2014 was not that active of a season, but this year is gonna be probably most likely way different than that, which makes it even more unique in its own way. I guess that it might start a little bit quiet, but overall the season might not be so quiet.
yeah, And you could see the reflection in I guess from mid June onward. This is the zonal wind anomaly in the 200 millibar level. And kind of when we're thinking about it in terms of development, we actually in the upper level of the atmosphere, we do want to see a bunch of these easterly zonal winds because that represents more rising air, I think, in the upper levels of the atmosphere, and we really see on the CFS weekly, at least from late June onward into early July. The CFS weekly goes out to July 13th. I guess July could be active, and me and Danny, we actually talk about this quite often. Looks like July could
Yeah,
really
yeah.
be active, and the GEFS too. Let's go back to that run from the 0Z. Yeah, notice zonal winds all throughout the deep tropics, very easterly in the upper levels. Probably will get some really good development chances from late June onward. Probably in the deep tropics in the MDR, and maybe something in the Caribbean, you know? Maybe we get an Elsa or likes of that. You
Not
never know.
impossible. It's
Never
not
know.
impossible.
Yeah. All right, so wanna venture into predictions?
Sure, why not let it fly, man?
Let's do it. All right, here we go. So, I guess a general sum up with everything that we looked at. Here are the 2024 June updated predictions. Let me really quickly look at what I predicted in April. But I know I went in April, or at least for what I have for June right now, I'm predicting as of June in the Atlantic, 20 to 25 named storms. Let's see. In April, I predicted, I'm trying to look at my April thing now. 19 to 25 named storms I predicted in April. So not really much of a change. I don't see there need to be much of a change anyways. I think everything looks the same in terms of that it looks like it's going to be a really active season, kind of hanging out in the low to mid 20s range. 19 to 13 hurricanes, that's up from 8 to 12 from April. And I went 4 to 7 major hurricanes with an ace of 180 to 230. And yeah, so what are your predictions, Danny?
I'm at about 19 to 27 storms, like that median of 23 storms. But it could be as low as 19 and as much as 27. As much as 27. If everything went right, it could be 27 storms. And if it was not as active in that named storms department, probably 19. But when it comes to hurricanes, I say 10 to 13 with the average of it being 12. And
Right.
then majors 5 to 7 with the average being 6. With an ace of 180 to 215 range.
Mm-hmm. And then yeah, so we got the name storm predictions. Honestly, even if we get some sort of, and I was talking about this with Danny earlier today, even if we get some sort of 2013 case scenario where we just see a major bust in the season this year, I really don't see it actually being below normal still. I just think either way conditions are just too favorable. And so that's why I have the really aggressive forecasts for this year, and everybody has a really aggressive forecast. How does that look like in terms of landfall hotspots, though? It's kind of a controversial thing to talk about landfall hotspots. Some people are really for it, some people are against it. But this is what I think will be the case will be when it comes to landfalls this year. Very high risk all throughout the entire basically all throughout the entire Western Atlantic. Um, some areas a little bit less of a risk. It's just mainly personally based off of what I really view will be most significant in terms of activity. Yeah, 2022 was also a bust year. That's right, Brandon Dunn. But this is what I think will be in terms of significant impacts. South Florida, the Keys, Bahamas. I actually, in contrast to my April prediction, I have circles in the pink of where I think I have the most confidence that we'll probably see some really, really bad or we'll probably get a major hurricane in this area, and I'm very confident on it. South Florida, the Keys, far southern Florida includes Miami, especially the Keys, Bahamas, around the Yucatan, Cancun, western tip of Cuba, and then infamously the north central Gulf Coast. And then, but I guess that's not really different from my prediction from um, April. What do you think about it?
Yeah, definitely you gotta watch those areas. Especially, I'm very concerned about places like the Yucatan, South Florida, and the Central Gulf, like Mississippi, Alabama, Eastern Louisiana, and even Texas. I'm kind of worried about this year. I wouldn't rule them out.
Hmm.
And yeah, the Yucatan. I've been seeing like the Yucatan and those areas being like very highlighted. Like with the analogs we have, like steering patterns, they really do favor those areas. So definitely a lot of concern for them.
Yeah. Um, the Houston Galveston area, um, I think especially emphasis on the Yucatan, Bahamas, and really the Texas and man, especially South Florida, Miami, the Keys. I mean, the Keys got Irma in 2017, but still, I feel like, especially in terms of South Florida as a whole, could have gotten it much worse with Irma than they did. I think especially a really major hit on far southern Florida, even on the eastern side, is well overdue. This year, Miami is, I think, well overdue for at least hurricane conditions. Not saying they'll get a major landfall. Of course, I'm not saying that these predictions as a whole will verify. These are once again just my opinion and my opinion only. I really, really, really want to stress that. Not trying to seem like any sort of meteorologist, but I do want to give my opinions. And but yeah, far South Florida, Miami, even Southwest Florida, that could potentially come in the late season as well. Maybe
Right.
some sort of Wilma-like track that we see impact the Yucatan and then kind of recurve into South Florida. We could see that as well. And then I also have elevated risks in the Northeast. In really active years like this year could be, especially for impacts. The Northeast does tend to get at least a weak tropical storm or so in terms of landfalls, or at least sometimes can tropical storm conditions, especially not even do they have to have a direct impact, but sometimes, and especially as of recently, even storms that make landfall on the Gulf Coast or even in Florida, sometimes they are able to race off to the Northeast and still bring conditions to the Northeast with tropical storm winds, or even a situation like Ida, which was really, really bad. In fact, it was worse in the Northeast as a whole than it was in some ways in Louisiana, caused more deaths in the Northeast than it did in Louisiana. So I have them. Bermuda and Atlantic Canada, they've been really getting a lot of stuff recently, and I actually do not think that that'll change this year. They'll probably get more things impacting them this year, so I have them in a moderate risk, but I really want to emphasize the Caribbean and the Gulf. I do not want to take the attention away from Florida, especially South Florida. I really think South Florida is overdue for some really, especially near Miami, than the Miami Metro, and even the Keys as well. That just in general, South Florida has really not seen as much hurricane activity as they should be, given how much activity we've been getting over the last several years. I'm sure you agree with me, Danny.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but I really do want to emphasize the Caribbean this year. I really do feel like lots of people, even though the Caribbean is very much a known hotspot, in a year like this, in a La Nina, in an active La Nina season, the Caribbean is really a notable place for activity, and I really want to emphasize all of the Caribbean. I think really needs to watch out this year. So, do you want me to move on to the Eastern Pacific? Because I have Eastern Pacific predictions, or you want to give some thoughts?
I was gonna say like one thing about like somewhere like around like the Northeast. I mean, you can never really truly rule them out. I wouldn't be surprised if they got impacted by something this year. Um, Even though they're not really being like the focal point, they're not being talked about as much as like the Gulf Coast or Florida, south part of Florida, and the Bahamas, and I would not rule them out this year. They have a chance, and usually they get impacted by these type of systems like Ida, even Elsa, like those that come from the Gulf and move up. I
Hmm.
wouldn't be surprised if something like that happened this year, honestly.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I would agree, and that's why I do have them in a slightly elevated risk uh, this year for some portions of the Northeast. Um, and and this is actually interesting. Brandon Dunn mentioned this: storms impacting Bermuda can turn into New England before heading towards the Canadian Maritimes. 2020 had one storm with potential, but it failed, which was Hurricane Teddy and Hurricane Fiona um, in 2022. Shift Fiona just several hundred miles to the west, and it would be literally a major hurricane impact in New England and Long Island, probably, or close to a major hurricane impact. And even if not, a probably very very devastating impact at that, because Fiona made landfall in Atlantic Canada with a pressure, was it a pressure of like 932, really, something like that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
And yeah, just shift Fiona a few hundred miles to the west, and sometimes, we know how the deal is with these storms. They wobble, just they have one small wobble, and that in the end ends up shifting the entire forecast literally hundreds of miles in either direction. So we had, honestly, I actually could say we've, I think, had some close calls in terms of Northeast impacts over the last several years.
We have even on Lee last year, and maybe had like slight chance. It didn't do so, but like if there was some shifts westward, more shifts westward with the track, it could have maybe been an impact for like extreme northern part of the Northeast for sure. I mean, I think Maine, the state of Maine got impacts slightly, but if it was like another 200, 300 miles to the west than it actually was, it could have been way worse for sure.
Yeah. All right. Since we kind of don't have that much time left, or at least I want to end soon, I'm gonna really quickly move to the Eastern Pacific. As expected, a down season there. Again, La Nina on the cards. But I actually do have a little bit of lenience towards the Eastern Pacific this year. It'll probably be a less active season overall, but I do still think there will be some activity there. I forecast 12 to 17 named storms, 6 to 8 hurricanes, and 2 to 4 major hurricanes. I I say this mainly because from 2020 to 2022, that 3 year Nina stretch, all 3 years in the Eastern Pacific had 17 plus named storms, despite the fact that we had a moderate Nina each year. What do you think about that?
Nah, it's been like a testament to show that the East Pack, regardless of what Enzo it is, has been able to fight and still be active some way somehow. Like this
Yeah,
part of the hemisphere has found that recently. The Atlantic with the El Nino last year was able to be active. The East Pack and La Ninas have been able to be active. It's very interesting, what
yeah.
we've seen with that.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. Um, and I guess you could go back to the map that I showed before. Very, very warm in the general Eastern Pacific basin, right near the coast of Mexico. And actually, when it comes to impacts, I'm not really that great when it comes to really knowing what's going to happen in the Eastern Pacific, but at least in terms of my gut feeling, I really feel like probably once again the Baja and central Mexico around the Manzanillo to the general area near the Baja, I think, is at highest risk for impacts this year. Usually further south than that, around near Central America, that really comes especially in the early season in June and May, and well, there's really not much of that happening at all right now. So not really including too much of the southern parts of the Mexican coast near and near Central America. Um, but yeah, that's what I think when it comes to Mexico. I think the Eastern Pacific as a um as a whole, it's kind of going to be predictable and repetitive this year. That's what I think.
No, I agree, bro. I agree. Like, I feel like it's gonna be kind of a thing that we, from like days out, we're gonna kind of know what the gist of how the storms are gonna be. You know, it's gonna be a
Yeah.
little like, yeah, we're gonna know how they're gonna be type. You know.
Mm-hmm. And also, I don't know how you feel about this, Danny, but I actually think though, it kind of seems like we've been getting a lot of close calls for Hawaii. I personally think they might actually get another close call this year. So I have a
I
moderate
actually
for
was
them.
thinking that. I was thinking that too. I was like, I mean, honestly, I was gonna be like, I wouldn't completely rule out Hawaii this year. I mean, I was like thinking that in my head when you were talking about like areas that you're saying could be affected. I'm like Hawaii. Honestly, I wouldn't rule them out. At least getting impacted or having a chance to be impacted by something, even if it's like an El Nino year. I mean, La Nina.
Yeah.
I, like a La Nina year. I wouldn't truly rule it out. I don't know why, but I wouldn't truly rule it out.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Hawaii, I think, might actually have, there's something in the potential for Hawaii. I mean, we've really been getting a lot of close calls there, though. Last year there was Zora. Was there something in 2022? I feel like there might have been something in 2022 that was a close call on Hawaii, but one that I could definitely remember was Douglas in 2020, of all years, was a very close call to Hawaii as well.
They had Lane as well that could have hit. They had some close calls lately. They just haven't hit, but they've had chances, honestly, there too.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I think those chances um might might we might as well see potentially another one for them this year too. So that is my predictions. Danny, if you have any predictions of your own, what do you think?
Between 12 to 15 storms in the East Pack,
Hmm.
with an average of like 14, 13, something like that. And I have 4 to 6 hurricanes happening, which is like a median of five. And then I have 2 to 3 majors happening there.
Yeah.
I could see, yeah, between 2 to 3. I don't see less than two, but I don't see more than three. I'm just between 2 or 3 this year, and but I do have like an ace of like 80 something. Not sure, but I don't think it'll be terrible. People are saying that it could be under 10 storms, but I don't see that happening. You know, I feel like it's too low.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I could agree with you there. I feel like everybody is probably really, bearish on the Eastern Pacific this year, um, given that it's La Nina and the Atlantic is super warm. So, there might be, well, we'll see, but I actually think the Eastern Pacific will still have some sort of leverage. Um, Brandon Dunn actually did mention though and asked, will the Northeast be impacted by a hurricane this year? Um, I think. What do you think about that, actually?
It's not impossible. I mean, it's not like I don't predict it like completely. I don't predict that, but like I wouldn't say it's impossible. I feel like they could definitely get. I don't know the impacts of something that already hit somewhere, or maybe they could actually get like a tropical storm landfall. Even, like maybe a decent tropical storm. Honestly, a hurricane. I'm not entirely sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happened either. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
at all.
I will say though, besides, really besides, Miami and Southern Florida, really South Florida, around where you live, Danny, like Miami, right? Um,
Yeah.
Northeast, I think, is another area that is well overdue. In fact, I feel like it's even more overdue in some ways than Miami is for a truly bad impact um, directly, because we have not had a major hurricane landfall in any New England state, including Long Island, even New Jersey, since the 1950s. It's not happened. And we've gotten close a few
Very
times.
strange.
Yeah, we've gotten close a few times. And in fact, I actually found out several weeks ago that Gloria initially was thought to be a major hurricane landfall in the Northeast. Hurricane Gloria of 1985, but that was downgraded several years ago. I think about 10 or I don't know, more than 10 years ago. But um, bottom line is that we've really not had that many great impacts on the Northeast besides Sandy, although very interesting thing with Sandy is that it was a really impactful storm for the entire New England Northeast coast, but it was only in terms of winds as strong as a category 1 ish system, and it was also transitioning into an extra tropical sort of hybrid sort of thing, which I guess which is part of the reason why it was really impactful, because it grew dramatically in size and it really got a lot of juice in terms of energy, even though it was only category 1 strength storm. But the Northeast, it's I think, they're definitely overdue, and I'll show you once again. I have a moderate risk for them this year. I'm not saying that they'll get, a major hurricane landfall this year, compared to the Gulf Coast and South Florida, which is, I think, wouldn't I would be shocked if there's not a major hurricane landfall on the Gulf Coast this year. I'm gonna say it straight out.
Right.
Um,
Me too. I would be too. I would be too.
I will be very shocked if we don't get a major hurricane landfall on the Gulf Coast this year. But in terms of the Northeast, they're definitely overdue. Maybe it'll be this year, maybe it'll be next year. But the Northeast is honestly also really overdue for a really strong impact. Um, um, Upwards of category 2, even category 3 strength. I emphasize more category 3 strength because that specifically is really what has not happened since the 60s. The 50s actually is the last time we got a major hurricane landfall in the Northeast. So it's really overdue. And it's honestly only a matter of time before we do get it, you know? And I guess since this year's expected to be really active, in a really active season, anything could happen, and honestly, anywhere could get impacted. So we'll have to see. Um, so yeah.
I was gonna say something about Sandy. Like I feel like what makes it so interesting was that like even though it was a category 1, like how big it was, it kind of made it seem like it was a category 5, like at least for New York standards, you know. Because I mean, I feel like even with a category 1 that impacts like the Northeast, it honestly feels like a major hurricane already, like a cat 3 4 ish that hits like I don't know my state for example. But like the way it was so huge in size, you know, the pressures are way lower than normal. It just made it feel like a Cat 5 impact in a way, you know?
Yeah.
Cat 4, Cat 5 into that area. Even
Hmm.
though it was only a minimal hurricane when it hit, if I'm not mistaken, you know?
Yeah, I think the wind field in Sandy was around I think the wind field in Sandy was almost the record in terms of how big the wind field was in terms of tropical storm force winds. Um and I think the pressure too was like 950s, 940s or so when it was impacting the Northeast. And we go back to Fiona in 2022. Once again, honestly, really just shift Fiona several hundred miles to the west, and we get a 930s impact in the Northeast. Probably, and with Category 2 strength winds, it'll probably still be absolutely crazy, and it'll probably be the worst impact for the Northeast that we've seen in a while. So really, anything could happen anything. Honestly, anything could really happen this year, especially given its active. Anything could really happen. Although I do want to make the point though, and I guess this could be like the closing sort of point since we're gonna wrap up in a few minutes. But the closing point I think is really to, even if we know we're really aggressive and really confident that this season could be active, it's really important to not get scared and not to always buy into the hype, because the hype, I guess, for this season as a whole is just inevitable given how warm the Atlantic is and the fact that we have a La Nina incoming, and also given that last year we had a really active season despite the fact that it was an El Nino. But really, do not buy into the hype in terms of internalizing the fear, and instead of internalizing the fear, really emphasize it on preparing and getting your first aid kit and getting your plans for um, preparing for the season now, instead of waiting till the last moment when you actually have a storm almost about to bear down on you and you have no plan whatsoever. And especially remember too, while I do, and I'm really confident, I'm pretty sure Danny is also confident as well, of very strong impacts potentially in the Atlantic this year. It is also important to remember that may as well not happen. We might as well have a 2010 sort of situation where we have many, many hurricanes. 2010 had 12 hurricanes and 19 storms, but not a single hurricane hit the United States. We might as well get that this year, or even if this year is on the lower active side, that does not mean that impacts will probably be less as well. There's been some really dead years too, where, I mean, Hurricane Andrew from 1992. 1992
Yeah.
was a inactive season, um, and we still had Hurricane Andrew. So anything could happen, and really don't let your guard down. Brandon Dunn, that picture is from Hurricane Rita as it was making landfall in Southwest Louisiana. He's asking about the hurricane picture on my thumbnail.
I don't know. I'm not. I don't really know. Is it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I got it from Hurricane Rita.
Oh,
That's the picture on my thumbnail, on my title card. So, yeah. Any closing thoughts from you, Danny?
I guess similar to yours. Like don't let other people, like, don't let hype casters, scare you. Like, it's more likely than not to be an active season, but you can never truly say, oh, you can never let what other people say um to basically determine what you should do or not. Like, you should listen to what professionals say, but like, don't take it like they're God or something. Like, it. You have to be prepared. That's the one thing for sure. You have to be prepared no matter what. Um, but don't get scared about what's coming. If you get scared, it's you're only gonna experience it even worse. You have to just, in these type of situations, you have to just confront them and take them how they come. You just have
Yeah,
to prepare and that's it. Don't wait until last minute. Don't let the storms come and you do nothing. Don't be like one of those people when they if they do come, or when they do come, that you just ignore it. Oh, it's not gonna come. It's not gonna hit. Like, don't be that type of person. Just do what you have to do in that city.
yeah,
Just do what's smart. Just be smart. Don't overthink things what other people say, but at the same time, don't when if they do come, just do what you have to do in that city. Just take the proper safety caution precautions and whatever, and you'll be good.
And also, I also feel like you should also try to rely sometimes on your instinct too, because maybe we've seen it even recently with storms like Hurricane Ian, where the forecasters, as you mentioned, don't always rely on the meteorologists because sometimes even the meteorologists get it wrong. The forecasters were showing Ian. I kind of find it funny how remarkably similar it was to Charlie, that they initially showed a southwest-ish. Well, I'm not sure about the that first part, but I know that in Ian, um, they initially showed a landfall similar to where it actually made landfall in actuality. But as the days went on, they shifted the forecast track northward closer to Tampa, and that caused lots of hype for Tampa. And everybody was going crazy on the fact that Ian might be a Tampa landfall and might actually be a doomsday scenario for Tampa. And then, much like Charlie, within the last day before landfall, suddenly it shifts south, and it ends up pounding Sarasota and Fort Myers. So definitely always trust your instincts, especially when it comes to models too. I remember from 2020, and I think Danny, you could agree, the models were absolutely
Yeah,
terrible in 2020.
yeah.
It was horrible.
An
Um,
example, like Laura, like 5 days before Laura hit, or even four, they were forecasting it to hit South Florida as a hurricane, and it went south of Cuba. You know, then I was 4 days out. You know,
yeah,
I was 4 days out. It was like a whole 300, 400 miles south than what was forecasted initially. You know,
right. Um, yeah, and even with Sally, the models, did they not even pick up on Sally within the last?
they did not. They did not. Only the H4 model, but at the time, everyone thought that it was like overdoing it, so they didn't really buy into it. But in the actual models, the ones that people like use and rely on, in those type of situations, they didn't show anything for him with that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it showed nothing.
Yeah, so yeah, you gotta trust your instincts. Beware of the models too, because I think especially in active years like this, sometimes the models just don't always get it right. But we'll try. We'll see, how the season plays out. Um, it is day one once again, and we have 182 days more to go. It's definitely going to be a journey, and a journey that maybe we're not looking forward to. I'm definitely, though, because I'm a hurricane geek.
Right, me too.
Yeah, but day one, June 1st, here we are. Hurricane season is finally upon us. I guess there's really not much else to go over, is there?
Yeah, like, I remember like the previous years when we did this, like we had like storms happening, but this year is different. You know, like there's not even like a signal or like a defined signal yet that is in the close range enough to like talk about in a consistent level. So it's just different. You know, it's different in a way this year when it comes to that.
Yeah, and you know what? Honestly, I say enjoy it because enjoy it while the quiet lasts. Um, yeah, Brandon done. We're all hurricane geeks, and you know what? We should be proud of it because tracking hurricanes is a very fascinating thing. Although they do cause a lot of damage to Mother Nature, hurricanes really are um, one of the most fascinating forces of nature ever. Honestly,
Yeah.
they really just are fascinating, and it's really interesting, and it'll be really interesting to see how they pan out this year. So yeah, I guess enjoy the quiet now because I'm pretty sure after we're done with these 182 days, I'm pretty sure we'll be begging for quiet. I have a feeling we'll definitely, by the end of these 182 days, we'll be begging for quiet. I'm definitely sure of that.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so any last thoughts before we end?
I was gonna say, I feel like the one thing I want to say is that this is probably the most quiet we're ever gonna be in the whole season. Maybe this first 2 week stretch, and then the last 5 or 6 days of the season, like late November. These are probably gonna be the most quiet parts of this whole season. So if you haven't prepared, this is the best opportunity to do so. Luckily, Mother Nature is giving us like a little window in the beginning of the season if you haven't prepared to prepare now. You know, it's like because it's not gonna let you prepare in August or something. You know.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, that you mentioned that La Nina years also tends to be really active in the late season as well, so we might as well, right to the end of the season, be dealing with lots of activity too. Certainly possible, for sure. Um, with that being said, though, glad to have you along. Glad for you, Danny, to be along with me. It was a
For
really
sure,
fun.
man. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. And we're gonna be here, right? We're gonna be here for the next 182 days. Go subscribe to Danny as well, Weather Hub TV. That's his channel. He's gonna be posting as well throughout the season, and hopefully we'll both be able to post and be here on the journey that'll be this hurricane season for the next 182 days. Whenever there's a big storm, um, we'll post, and we'll be here. And definitely subscribe, not only to me but also to Danny as well. Um, Help grow the community too, because especially in an active year like this, trust me, you'll need a community to be able to get information. It's just also generally good to have a community as well to share information and for all of us to be able to check in on each other. So, with that being said, I guess we're going to end.
Yes, sir.
All right. So, glad to have you all. I guess one day down, 182 days more to go. I'm Danilo Evangelista. Stay safe. Peace, love, and kindness to all of you. And we will talk again probably very soon. Good night. All right.
Yeah, I was worried, bro. When that shit had issues